All right, so we're gonna take a page out of Tuesday night. We're gonna start with a Gemara because we have started the Rambam's discussion about the elements, the four elements that we discussed last week, the earth, wind, and fire, and of course water. But where does the Rambam get this from? Usually, the Rambam takes most, if not all, of his information from the Talmud. So the Gemara in Chulin Daf Kuf Chav Zayin has a discussion about a very, very controversial topic, which is spontaneous generation. Any experts out there in spontaneous generation? The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan. I'm reading from Chulin Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. Hatzav liminehu. The pasuk says in Shmini by the Shmona Shratzim, it talks about the tzav is one of the 8 shratzim that are metame. Lahavi ha'arud v'chen hanafilim v'hasalamandra. So the pasuk includes a animal called the arud, whatever that means. It's some kind of a snake. V'chen hanafilim, and also another animal called nephilim. And salamandra, and the famous salamander. What did the Gemara think about the salamander? The Gemara actually has a discussion at the end of Chulin and says that the salamander is created from fire. All right. And because the Gemara talks now about the salamander, it continues on an Agadic exposition where it says, Ukishahaya Rabbi Akiva Magia la Pasuk Zeh. When Rabbi Akiva reached the pasuk, the famous pasuk in Tehillim, in the chapter of Baruch Nafshi, Ma Rabu Masecha Hashem, Rabbi Akiva would say, Yesh lecha brios gedolos biyam, Yesh lecha brios gedolos bayabasha. There are animals that are created from land, and there are animals that are created from the sea. Okay? Bayabasha shebiyam ilmale olos bayabasha miyad mesos. Right? The creatures that are created from the ground, if they were to go into the water, they would die. Bayabasha, and creatures that are created on dry land, imala yardos liyam, if they would go into the water, miyad mesos, they would die right away. Yesh lecha brios gedolos ba'or, yesh lecha brios gedolos ba'avir. There are creatures that are created out of fire, and there are creatures that are created out of air. Sheba or ilmala olos la'avir miyad mesos. If one creature that's created from the fire would go into the air, they would die right away. And sheba avir ilmala yardos la'or miyad mesos. And the true is regarding creatures that are created in the air. If they were to go into fire, they would die right away. Ma Rabu Masecha Hashem. Wow, that is awesome. Okay. So there was a belief. It's one of the few topics in the Gemara that we call taboo today, which is the belief that things can grow without reproduction. Like, for example, the Gemara talks about mushrooms that grow from humidity, right? We know that to be the case, not exactly the case, but, fungus can form not through, classic reproduction out of the moisture in the air. But then the Gemara talks about a animal, a chulda, that's born through the ground. All right, very, very debatable. Books were written about this topic. We're not going to discuss it now, but there are many, many commentaries about what the Gemara is referring to. And the third one is the salamander that got created out of fire. So we don't know exactly what this means, but the point why I'm bringing this Gemara up is because the Gemara says that there are 4 kinds of existences. One is the earth, and one is the water, and one is the fire, and one is the air. Okay, so there you see specifically that there are four elements, and each one is distinct, that one cannot live in another's atmosphere, right? In another ecosystem, right? That's the word people love to use today, ecosystem. So I'll use it, right? That's what Rabbi Akiva meant. Okay, water animals cannot live in the land and vice versa. And the words of Rabbi Akiva are actually a little deeper. He says, gedelos biyam, right? They grow up, and you could even interpret it, they grow up from the water. So he may be referring to, this kind of spontaneous generation, that animals are born not through classic reproduction. I'm not sure if he's even referring to that, but either way, without getting off subject, I think that's where the Rambam has his Talmudic source as to as to where he gets these, or where he could show the location in the Gemara of these four states of being. So that being said, we'll go back to the Rambam. Mishnah Torah, here we go. So we're up to the fourth chapter in Hilchas Yesodei Hatorah, and now we are going to go really, really deep into this metaphysical existence of these four states of matter, right? Earth, wind, fire, and water. So the Rambam says, Arba gufim halalu shehem esh uruach umayim ve'eretz hem yesodos kol hanivraim lamata min harakia. These are the yesods. These are the fundamental elements of everything created below the rakia. V'chol shehem ha'adam u'vehema v'of v'remes v'dag v'tzemach u'mateches v'avanim tovos. So the Rambam starts off by listing animals and things that have life to it, creatures, vegetation. Then he goes into inanimate objects such as steel and stone and pearls and building material and mountains, the gushay afar, right, and mud and pieces of earth. Hakol galman mechubar ma'arba yisodas halalu. So the Rambam's principle, like he said last week, is every single thing that exists, okay, is some form of at least one of these four elements, right? We said these are like the building blocks, okay? Like today, everything has atoms and molecules, and right? So the building blocks of every single thing in existence has at least one of these four, and some are combinations of four. Nimtzu, and here the Rambam gets a little tricky to understand. He says, Kol hagufim shalamatim in harakia. So it comes out that everything in our existence, chutz ma'arba yesodos ha'elu, mechubarim migolam v'tzura. Okay, anything in existence, okay, with the exception of these four states of matter, have some kind of combination. Okay, so anything you possess, you're holding a piece of cheesecake, there's going to definitely be the reason why it has a form, the reason why it has consistency is because there's matter inside. That is keeping this piece of cheesecake together. That's why you could hold it, right? It's not water that's slipping through your fingers, but it has some consistency. So every single thing has some form of one of these four building blocks. The golem shelahem mechubar me'arba sodos ha'elu, and the form is some kind of combination of at least one of these four forms. Aval kol echad me'arba hayasodos, but each item, and this is where it gets a little tricky, each of these four elements standing by itself, eno mechubar elu megolem v'tzura bilvad. Okay, each of these building blocks Separately, are some kind of units that exist only in Golem and Surah. So the Rambam is a little bit contradictory. I'll be honest. I don't understand completely. Like on the one hand, he's saying that they each have one of these four characteristics, and then it sounds like he says that the building block itself, earth, wind, fire, and water, um, are a combination of Tzura and Golem. This is, a little bit above my pay grade. So, we'll have to go on. It's very, very hard to understand. Usually the Rambam is very succinct, but over here he's very verbose and repetitive. Derech ha'esh, number 2. Derech ha'esh v'haruach lihios. Now we're going to talk about the nature of these elements. So, derech ha'esh v'haruach lihios mahalacha mimata mitabur ha'aretz lamala klape harakia. So let's talk about the wind and the fire, for example. These two their characteristics is that they go up, meaning you you have smoke, rises, okay? Ruach rises. So that's Eish and Ruach rise. They go from the earth up toward the Shamayim. Klape harakia. V'derech hamayim v'haaretz lihios mahalacha mitachas harakia lamata ad la'emtza. Then on the other hand, you have water and the ground that don't, subscribe to this theory, to this gravity, right? They do, as opposed to Eish and Ruach go up. They kind of defy gravity, but Mayim and Eretz are following the laws of gravity. They go down to the bottom, okay? They sink. She'emtza harakia hu amata she'en lamata mimenu. Because whatever that means, the center of the earth is the lowest point, and there's nothing below that. Vein hilucham lo bedaitam lo becheftzam ela minhag shenitba behen v'teva shenitba behen. And the way these elements work is that they don't think, right? It's not like the fire could wake up one morning and say, well, today I want to be cold. These are pre-programmed, right? They stick to what their tendency is, right? They don't change their mind. They are on, right? They follow their minhag, so to speak, that God created, right? Nature from the beginning. And that's how it works. We spoke about this, I don't know if you remember, about 4 years ago when we just started this class. We had a Tuesday night here in the beginning of Tainus, where we spoke about the 3 keys that are given over, and we're speaking about weather, and that was one that George Johnson of blessed memory was very active in that class, if you remember that night. But anyways, so that's the characteristics of earth, wind, fire, and water. They stick to what they're used to. Now the Rambam is going to describe the nature of all of these elements. And it's pretty simple because we understand it. But the Rambam goes through Teva Ha'esh, Cham v'Yavesh. What is fire? Fire obviously is hot, and it's dry, v'hu kal mikulam, and it's the lightest, right? Fire, if you weigh fire, fire doesn't weigh anything. It could cause a lot of destruction, but if you put fire on a scale, it won't weigh anything. It has no mass. V'haruach cham v'lach. Ruach is hot, and it's also moist. Okay? V'hamayim karim v'lachim. And water is related in that it's moist, but it's not hot like the wind. It's cold. That's what its natural tendency is. V'haaretz yevesha v'kara, and land is dry and it's cold. V'hi kfeda mikulam, and that has the most mass. V'hamayim kalim mimenu, and second to least mass is the water. Lefichach nimtzaim lamala al haaretz. That's why they are on top of the land. They have ballast to them, so it sinks down. V'haruach kalmin hamayim, and then on the scale number 3, on the lightest scale is the ruach. Lefichach hu merachef al pnei hamayim. That's why it could hover, like the pasuk in Bereshis. V'ha'esh kalmin haruach, and the lightest of all them is the Aish. That's why Aish doesn't fall down like gravity, it goes up. Umipnei shehem yisodos l'chol gufim shetachas harakia, because these are the fundamentals and the foundation for all the bodies that are in this world. Yimatzeh kol guf v'guf ma'adam u'behema v'chaya v'of v'dag v'tzemach u'matechet v'even. All of these elements, all of these things, the man and animal and vegetation and stone, right? Galmo mechubar me'esh v'ruach u'mayim ba'afar. The Rambam's repeating himself from last halacha. It's all some kind of combination of earth, wind, fire. They are batsan yisarvu biyachad, and it's possible to mix all these together. V'yishtanu kol echad mehen be'etz ha'eruv, and when you mix them together, they're each going to have a different consistency. Ad sheyimatzeh ha'mechubar merabatan eno doma la'echad mehen shehu levado. Right? You're never going to have two that are equal. One has a, right? This is all proportions, right? That's what the Rambam is going to talk about now, where you could have a 25, 25, 25, 25. You could have a 10, 10, 60, 20, right? Every being has a different composition. That's the word I'm looking for. A different chemical composition. Okay, and eno doma le'echad mehen shehu levado. You're never going to have one item that is 100% made of one element. You're never going to have all fire. O mayim bifnei atzman, o eretz bifnei atzma, o ruach bifnei atzma. You're never going to have 100% of one of the elements. Ela hakol nishtanu v'nasu guf echad. It's all mixed together to form one guf. V'chol guf v'guf ha'mechubar merabasan, and each body that is that consists of these 4 elements, yimatzeh bo kor v'chom lach v'yavish ke'echad. You have a whole hodgepodge of different characteristics. You have heat, you have cold, you have wet, and you have dry. But there are bodies in the universe that have a preponderance for having a majority of one of the elements. For example, living things. A living thing proportionally would be heavy, so to speak, on the fire element. Lefichach yira behem hachom yater. That's why we keep what's it called, homeostasis, right? Where the body maintains a certain temperature. We are hot people. We are 98.6 degrees. That's how much our temperature is. So therefore, we have more of the element of fire in us. On the other hand, your typical stone is obviously going to have more of the land, more of the earth element. That's why it tends to be dry. Then you have those items that are heavy on the water side. Therefore, they tend to be moist. That's why you're going to find one body, it's possible, one to be hotter than the others. If you take a temperature of a person and you take a temperature of a rock, you're going to see a great difference of variation. V'guf yavesh yeter miguf acher yavesh, right? And you're going to have one person or one body that's Yavesh is going to have a different temperature than someone else. Then you're going to have bodies that are only, right, core. You have all these permutations. You have mixed, then you have, you're going to have only core, you're going to have only lach. Then you're going to have 50-50, right? Core and yavesh, right? Oh, hakor v'halach, or you're going to have cold and dry, ke'echad b'shaveh. Oh, hachom v'hayovesh, ke'echad b'shaveh. Or you're going to have heat and dry, 50-50, and not any other of the three, and not any other of the two elements. So there's all kinds of permutations, says the Rambam, or the last two, oh, hachom v'halach, ke'echad b'shaveh, or the heat and the moisture, and the moist also 50-50. Then he ends off by saying, Lefi rov hayesod shahaya be'ikar hataroves yera'eh maisa oso hayesod v'tivo baguf hama'urav. So the way he ends off is basically, think of it like a cholent, right? You have, or like a soup. You're going to have, what does the broth consist of? You have the chicken flavor, you have the vegetables, you have the spices, you have the, I don't know, whatever you put into the soup. So you can't really separate, at least on a molecular level, you can't separate one characteristic from the other. The soup is going to be tasting more for whatever ingredient you put more into. So that's why he says, Lefi rov hayesod, to whatever the majority that you put in this taroves, in this mixture, that will be noticeable and expressed the most, resulting from a combination of all these materials. So, whichever ingredients you put the most in, that's going to express itself the most. So, I don't know. Hope you understood that. And we'll continue tomorrow.